And then some quick terminology to help clarify some things as we're discussing and setting things up here. So I thought we would define some common terminology that we use when we're discussing floating network licenses. Okay. First of all, the host computer. The host computer is the computer that communicates with other computers on the network, which will distribute the license to those other computers. It is typically a server. CAMWorks does not necessarily have to be used on this computer, but it can. The license is licensed to its MAC address. So the hosted computer is typically a server, and that's going to host and hold the licenses on a floating network license. Then there's the client workstation computers. They're computers network that do run CAMWorks. They will look back at the host license to get the license from the hosting computer. So the other big one here is the license version date. The license version date is the license date required for that given version of CAMWorks. So when you guys purchase CAMWorks USP, you're given a date, and you can run any version up until that date of CAMWorks that's out. Okay, and that date when you purchase USP is the support USP expiration date. That expiration date in your license is where it will halt access to any version where the license version date exceeds it. So such as CAMWorks 2020 Service Pack 1 requires a license date of, I think, January 15th, 2020. If your license date is older than that, you won't be authorized to run that version. Then you can renew it, your USP date, and that'll extend your date, and then you could then run that software. Perpetual licenses are never-ending licenses. All CAMWorks licenses are perpetual licenses, unless for some reason they put a timer on it because of, they're waiting on payment confirmations or someone to return a license if you're transferring a license. But they are perpetual licenses, they're never ending. That means you can run any version of software going backwards in time that came out before this date. Okay? You cannot run any version of software that comes out after your USP expiration date is what that means. So in every software's version and service pack has its different license version date requirement. So I hope that clarifies some terms here. I'm going to go over some additional requirements for a floating network license and also some recommendations real quick. So some quick requirements here. For floating network licenses, it does require the CAMWorks License Manager. The CAMWorks License Manager is a FlexLM based, so it uses the FlexLM kernel in the background of the CAMWorks License Manager. It does require a Microsoft Windows network. It also requires a network adapter on that computer. The host computer must contain a static MAC address. This is a pretty big one because its license is licensed to the MAC address of that computer. One of the big common exceptions here is questions that come up are virtual computers. Yes, CAMWorks License Manager can license to a virtual computer. The one big thing is with that is that virtual computer must have a static MAC address. If that virtual computer does not have a static MAC address, that MAC address will then change and the license will then fail because it's only licensed to, it's encrypted to only allow that given computer, that given MAC address to function. So virtual computers can be done. It's a little bit tricky, a little more support, but that's just because of the static MAC address requirement. And there are options when you set up a virtual computer to ensure that that's a static MAC address. So you want to make sure it's not dynamic because it'll change the host ID or MAC address on you, and then all of a sudden the license will stop and fail. Another requirement here, installation configuration must occur from administrator account. So always when you're installing or adjusting the license configurations, you always want to do that from an administrator account. That's because once it's configured, the other users will inherit those license settings. Windows will write those settings in the Windows registry for all users if you have administrative rights when you configure it, and then all users will inherit those settings on that computer. So that's a must here. Also, when we get in license borrowing, it does require you to have administrator privileges, which we'll go over here shortly. Some recommendations for ultimate success here with the Flow Network license, we recommend the same CAMWorks License Manager version that's on the hosting computer and the client computers. So we're going to keep those the exact same version. That seems to keep things more flawlessly running. And one thing I like to note, CAMWorks 20, when it came out, did have an all-new license manager. So if you have not updated your server when you're going to update CAMWorks 20, I would also update this license manager version on that server or hosting computer. We do recommend a wired gigabit network connection. The faster the better. That way you don't have any delays on the licensing or anything like that, because the CAMWorks will check back to the hosting server periodically during the session as you're using it to make sure it can still obtain a license. So I don't know what the interval is, but they do check it here and there every time you do different things through the session, so it maintains the connection network. So a good, stable, fast network is always best. Some people try wireless. I'm not a fan of wireless because wireless will drop in and out, and it can drop the connection and cause delays and issues as your program. If it can't find a license, it'll stop access to the software. So wireless is not the most reliable, although it is user-friendly as far as easy access stuff, but again, it's not the most reliable because it can drop out, especially when you get into machine shops where there's a lot of static electricity going through the earth and all the high voltage stuff around. Wireless is usually just not as strong. So we do recommend a wired gigabit connection for doing floating network licenses. They're just much more robust. And then the other big one here with flow network licenses, there's a lot of computers all have security software nowadays in them, and firewalls, including Windows itself has the firewalls. And it's just best to always configure the security firewall software so that the applications techsoft.exe and lmgrd.exe are allowed exceptions on the host computer typically. Both files are located in the installation folder of the CAMWorks License Manager here. So the techsoft.exe and the lmgrd.exe are in the License Manager folder. So it's best just to go ahead and give those the security software permission to allow those to run, and that way there's no hiccups going forward. Because I've seen where the license manager is working, everything's working great one day, and then the security softwares will put an update to make things more secure, and all of a sudden the license will start failing. And then we have to come back and manually put these exceptions in. So my recommendation is just go ahead and put them right out of the gate, and that way there's no interference or lag as if the security software is analyzing to see if it's good or not, and then permit it. So the things just work a lot smoother and faster by putting those exceptions in right out of the gate. And then the big one is the host computer should remain on the network and always be powered up. Yes, I know, things can happen, power goes down, but you want to typically keep it on the network where it is under power, so that means people can use and check out the license is throughout the day, that type of thing. I don't suggest putting them on like a laptop and someone taking the laptop home. So if the host computer is on a laptop, someone took it home to work from home that day, no one can get a license from it because they're home and off the network. So hosting them is best to host the hosting computer to be one that typically remains on the network and always powered up, which is typically a server. And then we always recommend to specify a port number. And that's done in the licensing setup and installation, and that port number can be done. We do recommend doing that. Things seem faster when you use the port, and there's some times when you have multiple softwares going on, it's best just to switch from the default FlexZone port to a different port, just because there's less traffic in that port going on for interference. So there are times when we have to pump them through a different port number. So those tend to keep things running more robust there. You follow those recommendations.